It was a quiet evening, the kind where the world seems to pause, and all you can hear is the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant chirping of crickets. I had just returned from the office, weary from the day's battles, both won and lost. The house was dimly lit, with only the hallway light casting elongated shadows across the wooden floor. As I hung my coat, I heard a muffled voice coming from the study. Curious, I approached, the soft carpet muffling my footsteps. The door was slightly ajar, and through the gap, I could see my wife, Emily, on the phone. Her back was turned, but her posture was tense, her free hand gesturing animatedly. "Yes, he's completely unaware," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The merger will go through, and by then, his shares will be worthless." My heart sank. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. Was she talking about me? Our company? I leaned in closer, careful not to make a sound. "Don't worry," she continued, "once it's done, we can move forward. He'll be out of the picture, and we'll have everything." I stepped back, my mind racing. The woman I had married, the mother of my child, was plotting against me. I felt a mix of anger, betrayal, and disbelief. But I couldn't confront her, not yet. I needed to understand the full extent of her plan. Over the next few days, I observed her closely. She was careful, erasing call logs, using encrypted messaging apps, and taking calls only when she thought I wasn't around. But I was always watching, always listening. I discovered that she was in cahoots with my biggest competitor, a man named Richard. They had been planning this for months, using our marriage as a cover to gain insider information about my company. The merger she mentioned was a hostile takeover, designed to strip me of my assets and leave me with nothing. I couldn't let that happen. Not for me, and certainly not for our son, Jake. He deserved better. He deserved a future untainted by deceit and betrayal. I began to gather evidence, documenting every conversation, every transaction, every secret meeting. I hired a private investigator to follow her, to dig into her communications, to uncover the full scope of their plan. The more I learned, the deeper the betrayal felt. But I remained calm, composed. I knew that confronting her prematurely would only tip her off and jeopardize my chance to protect my company and my son. I needed to be strategic, to outmaneuver her and Richard at their own game. I started by securing my assets, transferring shares to trusted associates, and implementing security measures to prevent unauthorized access to company information. I also began to leak false information, feeding them a narrative that would lead them down the wrong path. As the days turned into weeks, I watched as their plan began to unravel. The merger talks stalled, investors grew wary, and Richard's company started to suffer losses. Emily became increasingly anxious, her demeanor shifting from confident to desperate. Then, one evening, she confronted me. "I know what you're doing," she said, her eyes filled with a mix of anger and fear. "You're sabotaging everything." I looked at her calmly. "I don't know what you're talking about," I replied, feigning ignorance. She glared at me, her fists clenched. "Don't play dumb. I know you've been interfering with the merger." I shrugged. "If there's a problem with your business dealings, perhaps you should take it up with your partner." She stormed out, slamming the door behind her. I knew then that the endgame was near. In the following days, I made my move. I presented the evidence I had gathered to the board of directors, exposing Emily and Richard's scheme. They were both removed from their positions, their reputations tarnished beyond repair. I filed for divorce, gaining full custody of Jake. Emily was left with nothing, her assets frozen pending legal proceedings. Richard's company collapsed under the weight of the scandal, his investors pulling out and leaving him bankrupt. As I stood in my office, looking out at the city skyline, I felt a sense of relief. I had protected my company, my son, and my future. The betrayal had been painful, but it had also revealed the strength I didn't know I possessed. And as for Emily and Richard, they had played a dangerous game and lost. They were left with nothing, just as they had planned for me. I knew from that moment on that I was no longer just a husband or a father, I had become an actor in the cruelest play life could write. Each morning, I woke up next to the woman who had sold me out, wrapped in silk sheets that now felt like chains. Emily greeted me with a kiss, warm coffee, and a smile that masked rot beneath porcelain skin. I'd watch her glide across the kitchen floor in her robe, humming softly like nothing had changed, and it took everything in me not to scream. But I couldn't. I had to pretend. For Jake. Jake was only 6. Too young to understand betrayal, too innocent to know what manipulation smelled like. He adored his mother. In his eyes, she was a queen, flawless and radiant. And maybe, in some other life, she could have been that. But here, in our quiet home just outside the city, she was something else entirely, calculated, sharp, and dangerous. And I had to outplay her without letting him see the game. Every morning, I'd kiss Jake on the forehead and pack his school bag, just like before, while Emily smiled across the counter, acting like she didn't already sign her soul to the devil wearing Richard's $1,000 cufflinks. She'd tell me about her plans for the day, mention errands or lunches with friends, her tone perfectly casual, like we weren't living inside a lie. I listened, nodded, responded with the kind of affection I knew she expected. But behind my smile, my mind was working faster than it ever had in the boardroom. At night, after Jake was asleep and the house settled into silence, I'd retreat to my office, lock the door, and review everything. Emails, call logs, financial records, anything I could gather to stay one step ahead. My private investigator, Dan, was feeding me updates daily. Every move Emily made, every meeting she had, every bank transaction she thought she'd hidden, I knew it all. "You're playing it smart," Dan told me over the phone late one night, his voice gravelly with exhaustion. "But don't get comfortable. She's smart too, and I don't think she trusts you anymore." I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. "She shouldn't," I said quietly. "But that's the point. She thinks I'm too soft to do anything. That's her weakness." Still, it wasn't easy. There were moments, fleeting but real, when I'd catch her looking at Jake with such tenderness that I'd start to doubt everything. Was it possible that she didn't mean to drag him into this? That she had simply gotten in too deep and couldn't find her way back out? But then I'd hear her on the phone again, always when she thought I wasn't listening, her voice low and clipped. "The audit's scheduled," she said once. "He won't see it coming." Another time, "Once the stock drops, we sell everything. Don't leave crumbs." She knew exactly what she was doing. I started preparing for the fall. Quietly, methodically, I began transferring control of key assets. I moved critical files onto encrypted drives, updated legal protections, and set traps within our systems, anything that might reveal if she or Richard tried to breach company data. I met with my lawyer, off the record, and began revising my will. Not because I was afraid of dying, but because I was afraid of losing my legacy, of letting Jake inherit ruins built on deceit. One day, Jake came home with a drawing he made at school, stick figures, a house, a smiling sun. "That's you, Daddy," he said, pointing at the tall figure in the middle. "And that's Mommy. And that's me." He was grinning from ear to ear, so proud. I knelt beside him, brushing his hair from his eyes. "It's perfect," I said, but my chest ached. "You're an amazing artist." That night, I watched him sleep, his small body curled beneath his dinosaur sheets, unaware of the storm brewing just beyond the walls of his bedroom. I made him a promise silently: "I will protect you. No matter what it costs me." Emily grew more anxious as the days passed. I noticed it in the way she checked her phone constantly, how her laugh sounded forced, brittle. She started drinking more wine with dinner, often finishing a second glass before I even put my fork down. Her smiles became shorter, her gaze darted more often to the shadows. And I knew she could feel the balance shifting. One night, I followed her. She said she was going to meet a friend from yoga, but something in her voice gave her away. I waited 10 minutes after she left, then slipped out, tailing her at a distance. Dan had trained me well. She met Richard in a parking garage downtown. They talked inside his car for almost an hour. I couldn't hear everything, but I got enough. "I don't think he's buying it anymore," she said, her tone sharp. "We need to move faster." Richard scoffed. "Then push it. Get him to sign off on the valuation. If he does that, we can force the sale before the quarter closes." "I'm trying," she snapped. "But he's being careful. I think he's hiding something." "He's just paranoid," Richard said. "You've got this. He married you, didn't he?" That line stuck with me. He married you, didn't he? It wasn't just business. It was humiliation. Mockery. Richard wasn't just trying to beat me in the market, he wanted to break me, to prove that even in my own home, I was blind and powerless. I left before they saw me, drove home with white knuckles and a fury that felt like acid in my veins. But I didn't act on it. Not yet. Instead, I started building my endgame. I invited Emily's parents to visit the following weekend, under the guise of celebrating our anniversary. I played the loving husband, the doting father, the successful businessman. She didn't suspect a thing. Then I scheduled an emergency board meeting for the same day Richard was planning to make his move. I fed him a trail of misinformation through Emily, planting just enough truth to make it believable. And finally, I contacted the SEC. You don't go to war without knowing the terrain, and I had studied every inch of theirs. What they didn't know was that the documents they were relying on for the hostile buyout had been altered, subtly but enough to trigger suspicion. What they didn't know was that my company's core patents had been temporarily transferred out of corporate ownership under emergency protocols I implemented months ago. What they didn't know was that I had already won. And still, I said nothing. I went to bed that night next to the woman who was about to lose everything and kissed her on the forehead. "Happy early anniversary," I said with a smile. She smiled back. "I love you," she whispered. And I smiled too. Because tomorrow, it would all come crashing down. The morning of our so-called anniversary started like any other, but I could feel the air humming with tension, thick and metallic, like the stillness before a storm. Emily moved through the house with unusual efficiency, perfect makeup, her favorite white dress that always turned heads, and a laugh that sounded too high-pitched, too rehearsed. She was ready for her performance, expecting a celebration, expecting victory. But I wasn't celebrating. I dressed carefully that morning, every piece of my wardrobe chosen not for comfort but for control. Charcoal gray suit, polished cufflinks, a watch I hadn't worn since the early days of my company's founding, the one Emily had gifted me back then, back when I believed her. A symbol of beginnings, now a warning of endings. "Jake's with my parents today," Emily said over breakfast, avoiding eye contact. "They'll bring him home after dinner." "Perfect," I replied, sipping my coffee, keeping my tone neutral. "We'll have the house to ourselves. Just like old times." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. By 10 a.m., I was downtown, sitting at the head of the long glass table in our boardroom. The entire executive team was present. Some of them had grown suspicious over the past few months, whispers, doubts, a few uncomfortable glances. But no one had dared to speak openly. Not until now. I stood, cleared my throat, and began. "I called this meeting because we are under threat," I said plainly. "A covert attempt to manipulate and dismantle this company is underway, led by people who we once considered family." Gasps. Shuffling. A few leaned forward, others exchanged worried glances. Then I laid it out, all of it. The audio recordings, the financial trails, the fake audits, the fraudulent shell accounts. I projected emails between Emily and Richard on the screen, black and white evidence of treachery, every line sharpened like a knife. No one interrupted. "The hostile buyout plan for today," I continued, pacing slowly across the room, "is based on doctored numbers and stolen data. We have already alerted the SEC. By the end of today, legal action will be taken. But more importantly, our assets are safe. Our patents, our contracts, our investors, secured." I paused and looked each board member in the eye. "We will not be taken." The room erupted in whispers, questions, shock. But most of all, relief. That was when I saw it. One of my senior partners, Marcus, stood and clapped. Slowly, then others joined in. Not celebration. Not applause. Respect. They realized what I had done, how close we had come to the edge, and how quietly I had pulled us back. And yet, I wasn't finished. Later that afternoon, I arrived home to find Emily in the living room, a glass of wine in her hand, candles lit, soft music playing. The act was flawless. "Happy anniversary, darling," she said, walking up to kiss me. I kissed her back. "Come sit," she whispered, leading me to the table. "I made everything you like. Filet mignon, garlic potatoes, creme brulee." It smelled incredible, but the scent turned my stomach. I watched her pour wine into our glasses, her eyes flickering with nerves. She was waiting for Richard's call. waiting for the confirmation that the buyout had gone through, that I was officially ruined. She didn't know yet that everything had failed. I lifted my glass, watched the red swirl like blood. "To us," I said. "To us," she echoed, her smile faltering. The silence stretched. Then my phone buzzed on the table. I didn't have to look to know who it was. Emily did. She leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "Aren't you going to answer that?" "No need," I said casually, setting my glass down. "Everything I needed to say today has already been said." She froze. "What do you mean?" I stood, walked over to the fireplace, and picked up the envelope I'd left there earlier. I returned and placed it gently in front of her. She stared at it. "Go ahead," I said. "Open it." She did. And as her eyes scanned the pages, the color drained from her face. "Divorce papers. I've filed. And before you ask, yes, I have full custody. Yes, the house is mine. And no, there's nothing left for you to take." She looked up at me, her mouth trembling. "You can't do this. You don't have proof." "I have more than proof," I interrupted. "I have you on tape. I have financial records. I have enough to bury you and Richard together. But I won't." She blinked, confused. "Because I don't need revenge," I continued. "I needed clarity. And now I have it." I turned to leave, but her voice cracked behind me. "So what now?" she said, her words desperate. "You just walk away. You ruin me and walk away." I paused at the doorway. "No," I said. "I saved myself. You ruined yourself." And then I left her there, alone, surrounded by cold candles and untouched dinner, the house no longer her stage. Later that night, I drove to pick up Jake from his grandparents. He came running out with a drawing in his hand. "Daddy, look." I drew us flying. You and me in the sky. I knelt down, my throat tight. "Can I hang it in my room?" he asked. I nodded. "Of course, buddy. Right above your bed." We drove home in silence, the kind of silence that comforts rather than wounds. When we got there, I tucked him into bed and sat beside him until he fell asleep, his small hand curled around mine. And I realized something. This wasn't just the end of a marriage or a business rivalry. It was the beginning of peace. But as I stood alone in the hallway, listening to the quiet hum of our home, I knew the story wasn't over yet. Emily would fight. Richard would try to retaliate. And I would be ready. Because once you've stared betrayal in the face and survived, there's nothing left to fear. For a few days after I served Emily the divorce papers, silence took over like snowfall, soft, slow, deceptively peaceful. She moved out within 48 hours, taking only her clothes, some photos of Jake, and whatever dignity she had left. The house felt different without her presence, not just quieter, cleaner somehow, as if the air itself was lighter. But I knew better than to believe in quiet. People like Emily and Richard don't vanish. They retreat, reorganize, re-strategize. And that's exactly what they did. On the third morning, I received a message from Dan, my private investigator. "Check your inbox," it read. "You'll want to see this." It was a PDF, a copy of a legal complaint filed in a neighboring county. Emily was suing for spousal support, claiming emotional distress, financial manipulation, and parental alienation. She wanted half of everything I owned, including full legal custody of Jake. I stared at the screen, the words dancing in front of my eyes. She wasn't just trying to bleed me financially. She was trying to erase me from Jake's life. And that I could not allow. I forwarded the document to my lawyer, Andrew, a sharp, no-nonsense man who'd been with me since my company's inception. "She's bluffing," he said when we met that afternoon. "But that doesn't mean it won't get messy. She's hoping to drag this out and force a settlement. Probably got Richard funding her legal team." I nodded, jaw clenched. "Do whatever it takes. I want this shut down fast. And I want it quiet. Jake doesn't hear a word of it." Andrew leaned forward, eyes steady. "We'll handle it. But you need to be prepared. This won't be just a courtroom battle. This will go public." And it did. Over the next week, the media got wind of the lawsuit. First, it was whispers in financial blogs. Then local news. Then full-blown national coverage. Headlines screaming, tech CEO faces ugly divorce scandal, wife alleges betrayal and abuse. Photos of me and Emily smiling at some charity gala years ago ran beside the headlines. Twisted irony. A love story now weaponized for ratings. I kept Jake off social media, off the internet entirely. We read books, built Lego castles, went hiking in the woods behind our property. I told him we were having a dad and son adventure week, and he believed me. Because he trusted me. Because I hadn't lied to him. One night, after we watched a movie, he turned to me and asked, "Dad, are you sad?" I hesitated. "Sometimes," I said honestly. "But I'm okay." "Are you sad?" He shook his head. "Not when I'm with you." Those words burned into me. I kissed his forehead. "Then I'll make sure we're always together." Emily's first court appearance was brutal. She showed up dressed in white, like some fallen angel, her lawyers flanking her like bodyguards. Her arguments were rehearsed, polished. She played the victim with disturbing skill. She was emotionally manipulated, isolated, her lead attorney said. She signed documents she didn't understand, under pressure. They presented carefully selected emails, stripped of context. Claimed I was emotionally distant, obsessed with work, paranoid. When it was my turn, I didn't retaliate. I didn't speak in anger. I brought the facts. Time-stamped communications. Bank statements. Private investigator reports. Most importantly, audio recordings. Her voice, clear and sharp, discussing how to corner me and strip the company for parts. The judge leaned forward during the playback. Emily sat stiffly, her face pale. And then, finally, the voice of Richard. "Once he's broken, we move in. Emily handles the kid angle. She can say he was abusive, whatever works." The courtroom fell silent. Even Emily's lawyers looked shaken. She tried to explain, tried to say it was taken out of context. But it was too late. The truth had already settled like a thunderclap. That day, the judge didn't make a ruling, but the tide had turned. And Emily knew it. She confronted me in the courthouse parking lot, her voice low and frantic. "You planned all of this," she hissed. "You trapped me." "No," I said quietly, stepping closer so only she could hear, "you did that to yourself." I just held up a mirror. Her eyes flared. "I will not let you take Jake." "You already did," I said, then turned and walked away. The days that followed were brutal. Every headline felt like a cut. Every reporter camped outside our gate was a reminder that, despite winning battles, I was still deep in the war. But Jake kept me grounded. He didn't understand everything, but he sensed enough. He'd crawl into bed with me some mornings, quiet and still, and just hold my hand. I started therapy for both of us. I figured, if we were going to rebuild from the wreckage, we needed more than resilience, we needed truth and healing. The turning point came 2 weeks later. Richard was arrested. Turns out, the SEC had found more than I expected. Not just insider trading, but embezzlement. Fraud. Bribery. The charges hit the front page. Emily's case fell apart overnight. Her lawyers dropped her. Public opinion turned vicious. Sponsors pulled deals. By the end of the month, she had gone from glamorous socialite to disgraced pariah. She reached out once more, sent me a handwritten letter, which I almost didn't open. In it, she said she was sorry. Said she had gotten lost, confused. That she loved Jake. That she didn't expect forgiveness, just understanding. I folded the letter, placed it in a drawer, and never responded. Some people mistake regret for remorse. I wasn't interested in either. Eventually, the court granted me full custody. Emily was given supervised visitation, once a month, if she passed regular evaluations. She cried in court. I didn't. There was nothing left to cry about. She had tried to burn everything I built, and now, she stood in the ashes alone. As for me, I began to breathe again. Not all at once. Not easily. But day by day, the weight lifted. My company was stable. My name cleared. My son safe. And in the quiet hours of the evening, when Jake was asleep, and the wind brushed against the windows, I would sit in my office and stare out into the night. Not in fear. Not in anger. But in calm. Because I knew something now, something unshakable. Even after betrayal, after lies, after war, you can still win. And when you win with truth, no one can take it from you. They say after the storm comes calm, but they never tell you that calm doesn't mean peace. It's quiet, yes, but it's the kind of quiet that settles in after a fire, the smoke still thick in the air, the ground still smoldering. You survived, but everything's changed. Jake and I fell into a routine, one that looked normal on the outside: school runs, pancakes on Saturdays, bedtime stories every night, but underneath, there were cracks. Subtle, hairline fractures that hadn't yet broken open, but I could feel them. Some nights he'd wake up crying and say he dreamt Mom was gone and couldn't find her. Other nights, he wouldn't say anything at all, just crawl into bed beside me and hold my arm like he was afraid I'd disappear too. I'd lie there in the dark, listening to his breathing, and wonder how long it would take to undo the damage Emily had done, not just to me, but to him. If it ever could be undone. One evening, I was reading him a story, something about a dragon and a brave knight, and he stopped me halfway through. "Dad," he asked. "Yeah, buddy. Why don't you love Mommy anymore?" The question hit me like a punch to the chest. Not because I didn't have an answer, but because I had too many, and none of them were right for a 6-year-old. I set the book down. "That's a big question, Jake." He looked up at me, his small face serious. "She still loves me. She says so." "I know," I said quietly. "And I believe she does. But sometimes, love isn't enough to fix things." "Did she do something bad?" I paused. "She made some choices," I said finally. "Choices that hurt people. Sometimes, when people make those choices, they have to live with the consequences." He nodded, slowly, like he didn't fully understand, but maybe understood enough. He didn't ask more that night. I didn't sleep. The next morning, I called Dan. "I want everything on Richard's assets," I said. "Bank accounts. Properties. Shell companies. Anything he tried to hide." Dan was silent for a moment. "Thought you said you were done with them." "I am," I said. "But I need to make sure they're done with me." Because the truth was, Emily might have been exposed, Richard might have been arrested, but that didn't mean I was safe. Power like his doesn't vanish. It hides. It waits. It finds new ways to strike. And I couldn't afford to wait for another attack. Dan delivered. Offshore accounts. A hidden vineyard in Spain. A silent stake in a cybersecurity firm, of all things. There was even a fake name linked to a warehouse lease on the edge of the city. That last one piqued my interest. "What's in the warehouse?" I asked. "No clue," Dan replied. "But he visited it 3 times in the past 6 months. So I went. It was late afternoon when I pulled up outside the place, unmarked, dull gray, forgotten. The kind of building no one looks at twice. I parked around the corner, walked the last block, and used a code Dan had traced from an old security company invoice. Inside, it was cold, silent, and mostly empty. Except for one thing. A filing cabinet, locked. And next to it, a steel case. I cracked the cabinet open with a crowbar I'd brought. Years of corporate life hadn't dulled my instincts when it came to brute force. Inside were folders. Photos. Contracts. Notes. And then, audio cassettes. Old school, analog. But labeled. My name was on 4 of them. I didn't listen there. I took everything, boxed it up, and left before someone could follow. That night, after Jake was asleep, I dug an old tape recorder from the attic, sat down in my office, and pressed play. What I heard. It changed everything. The tapes were from months ago, conversations between Richard and another voice I didn't recognize at first. They talked about strategy, leverage, about me, but also about others. Names I knew. Executives. Politicians. Law enforcement. It wasn't just a corporate betrayal. It was a network. And Emily, she wasn't the top of it. She was used, same as I had been. She might have been willing, but she wasn't leading. One tape in particular chilled me. "She's getting sloppy," Richard said. "If she screws this up, we cut her loose." No blowback. "Blame it all on her." The other voice agreed. "She's good for appearances. Wife, kid, family men, media eats that up. But if it turns, she takes the fall." I stopped the tape. Because now I had to reevaluate everything. Emily was a traitor, yes, but she had also been a pawn. A greedy one. A reckless one. But not the mastermind. That changed the game. I called Andrew, my lawyer. "I need to reopen some files," I told him. "And I need immunity clauses for any evidence I turn in." "You're walking into something deep," he warned. "Are you sure about this?" I looked down at the tape in my hand. "Yeah. I'm sure." Because now it wasn't about revenge. Or even just protecting Jake. It was about finishing what I started. Burning the rot out at the root. And if Emily had any humanity left in her, any at all, maybe, just maybe, I could use this to force her hand. To make her flip. I arranged a meeting. Neutral ground. A cafe. She agreed, reluctantly. When she arrived, she looked different. Tired. Diminished. Like someone who'd seen too many truths, too late. "What do you want?" she asked, sitting down without a greeting. "I found the tapes," I said. "The warehouse. The case. I know everything now." She didn't flinch. Just lowered her eyes. "They were going to throw you under the bus," I said. "You were never going to win." Her voice was small. "I know." That surprised me. "So help me take them down," I said. "You cooperate, we cut a deal. You give names, evidence, testimony, I make sure you don't go to prison." She laughed softly, bitterly. "You do that? After everything?" I didn't blink. "Not for you. For Jake. He still thinks you're worth something." Her eyes welled up. First time I'd seen that in years. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." And just like that, the next phase began. Not war. Justice. But justice has its own cost. And I was prepared to pay it. Because the real enemy had shown itself, and I'd stared it in the eye. Now it was my turn to burn it to the ground. The week after my meeting with Emily felt like diving into deep water. You know the surface is above you, but the pressure pulls harder the deeper you go. She agreed to cooperate, but that didn't mean I trusted her. I couldn't afford to. Still, she handed over a trove of information, emails, phone logs, payment trails. And it was worse than I expected. Richard had built something far more sophisticated than a hostile takeover. This wasn't just about me. It was about dozens of companies across the country. Some folded quietly, others fought and lost. And behind it all was a structure, a web of influence and manipulation designed to look like coincidence. Richard didn't just ruin businesses. He reshaped industries. I realized then, with a sickening twist in my gut, that what I'd experienced wasn't personal. It was calculated. Clinical. Executed like a machine, cold, efficient, ruthless. Emily had been a willing cog, but still just a cog. And now that machine was turning toward me again. A few days after Emily started talking to federal investigators, Dan called me. "You've got a tail," he said. I froze. "Who?" "Don't know yet. 2 separate cars. Rotating. Professional. Not paparazzi." I looked out the window instinctively. My home sat at the end of a long private drive. I'd chosen it years ago for privacy. Now that very isolation made me vulnerable. I checked the cameras. Nothing obvious. But that didn't mean they weren't there. "I need names," I said. "Fast." Dan grunted. "Already on it." That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my office, lights off, listening. Watching. Waiting. By morning, I had made a decision. I took Jake to stay with my sister in Vermont. Told him it was a surprise vacation. He was thrilled. I forced myself to smile, to laugh, to play the part of a carefree dad. But when I hugged him goodbye at the station, I held on longer than usual. Be good for Aunt Lila, all right? He nodded. Love you, Dad. Love you more. When the train pulled away, I felt something I hadn't in a long time, fear. Not for myself, but for what might come knocking while he was gone. I went home, opened the steel case from the warehouse again, and listened to the rest of the tapes. One in particular caught my attention. Richard was talking to someone I hadn't heard before. A voice with a slight accent, possibly Eastern European. Calm. Unemotional. Are the asset transfers in motion? The voice asked. Yes, Richard replied. 2 weeks and we're out of the U.S. jurisdiction. And the contingency? If she talks, we clean it up. Quietly. I rewound it 3 times. If she talks. They weren't just planning to throw Emily under the bus. They were planning to erase her. That meant I was next. I called Andrew. I need full security detail. Real professionals. Not ex-cops, not mall guards. I want veterans. I know a team, he said. But it'll be expensive. Nothing is more expensive than being dead. Within 48 hours, my home became a fortress. Motion sensors. Reinforced locks. Armed guards rotating in shifts. Discreet but present. The kind of men who didn't flinch when you mentioned gunfire. And still, the feeling didn't leave me. Like I was playing chess with a machine that always thought 5 moves ahead. Then Emily disappeared. No calls. No texts. Her phone went dark. Her lawyer didn't know where she was. The federal agent assigned to her cooperation agreement couldn't reach her. She'd gone off-grid. I wanted to believe she'd run. But something told me otherwise. Dan confirmed it 2 days later. She's missing, he said. Last ping from her phone was near a warehouse in Newark. Then nothing. Security cams were wiped. Is she dead? I asked, my voice flat. No body. No proof. But I've seen this before. She's either in hiding, or someone made her disappear. I leaned back in my chair, a slow breath leaving my lungs. She'd tried to destroy me. But I didn't want this. Not for Jake. Not for anyone. Because even if she was guilty, even if she'd betrayed me, she was still his mother. And part of me, some bitter, human part, still remembered the woman I fell in love with, even if she'd been a lie. I met with the lead federal agent the next day. He looked like someone who'd seen too much war, and not enough peace. We need your help, he said. You've got access. Leverage. The trust of investors. If this thing's going to blow wide open, we need you inside it. I'm not a spy, I told him. I'm a father. He nodded. And if this group keeps growing, your son won't have a world to inherit. So I said yes. Not because I wanted revenge anymore. Because I wanted it to end. I began feeding the agency information through encrypted channels. Quiet conversations with old contacts. Data leaks disguised as routine audits. I moved carefully. Methodically. Like Richard had. Like the machine. And piece by piece, I saw the map take shape. Offshore companies. Fake board members. Fabricated tech. Industries poised to collapse so others could rise. They weren't just breaking businesses. They were rearranging reality. And I was the crack in the mirror. The next major break came when we intercepted a meeting between 2 of Richard's former advisors. Dan had a tap on one of their phones. In the conversation, one phrase stood out. Clean sweep next month. We can't leave survivors. That wasn't business talk. That was war. I passed the recording to the agency. And the next morning, they moved. 6 simultaneous raids. 3 arrests. 1 shootout. The news exploded. Suddenly, the world knew. Emily's name was never mentioned. Nor mine. The feds kept their word. But the machine had been exposed. And for the first time in years, it stuttered. I watched the news from my living room, alone, as the headlines rolled in. Billionaire conspiracy. Corporate espionage. International fraud. And Richard? He was gone. Vanished. Some said he fled to South America. Others said he was dead. A few believed he'd cut a deal and disappeared into witness protection. I didn't care. He was out of the game. And I had won. But victory didn't taste the way I expected. It tasted like dust. Like exhaustion. Like something you drink because you have to, not because you want to. I brought Jake home that weekend. He ran through the house like nothing had changed, laughing, excited to see his dog, his room, his toys. But I saw the difference. He was stronger. More cautious. The kind of strength that comes from absence and confusion. "Are we safe now?" he asked as I tucked him in. I hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, we are." And for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. I believed it. But deep down, I knew. There was one more thing I had to do. One final piece to end the story. And it would require going back to the beginning. To the place where Emily and I had first met. To the root of it all. The town where Emily and I first met hadn't changed much. A small lakeside place, 2 hours north of the city, where the trees were taller than the buildings and everyone still waved at strangers like it meant something. I hadn't been back since the early days, back when we'd escaped the city just to breathe, before Jake was born, before the masks and lies. I came here not for nostalgia, not for memories, but because unfinished stories have a way of pulling you back to where they began. And I needed closure. I parked by the water, the autumn wind moving gently through the trees, the sky heavy with clouds that hadn't decided yet whether to rain. The old inn where we once stayed was still standing. Whitewashed walls, ivy crawling up one side. It looked peaceful. Quiet. Like nothing bad had ever happened here. But I knew better. Emily had written the address of a storage unit on the back of that last letter she sent, the one I never answered. Something about, "If anything happens to me, this is where you'll find the truth." I hadn't taken it seriously at the time. I thought it was another trick. Another ploy for sympathy. But after everything that had unraveled, I couldn't ignore the possibility. The unit was on the edge of town, in a facility tucked behind a bait shop and a row of pine trees. No cameras. No front desk. Just cold metal doors and the hum of fluorescent lights. I keyed in the code from the letter. The lock clicked. The door creaked open. Inside were 3 things, a suitcase, a wooden box, and a folder. I opened the suitcase first. It was filled with passports, burner phones, cash in multiple currencies. Not for her escape, our escape. Mine and Jake's. It was labeled with our names. Her handwriting. I stared at it for a long time. Then the wooden box. Inside were photographs, real ones, printed and worn at the corners. Pictures of Jake as a baby, pictures of me and Emily before everything went wrong. Tucked underneath them was a thumb drive. I slid it into my laptop and watched the screen flicker to life. A video file. Dated 6 months before she disappeared. Emily sat in our kitchen. No makeup. No mask. "If you're watching this," she said, "then I've either run or I'm dead. I don't know which is more likely." She looked tired. Hollow. "I want to tell you everything. Not because I think you'll forgive me. But because maybe you'll understand why I became what I did." She spoke for 12 minutes. She detailed how Richard approached her during one of our company's fundraisers. How he promised freedom, power, independence. How she convinced herself it was for Jake, that taking control of our empire would protect his future. But it was never about protection, she admitted. It was about control. I told myself I was doing it for our family. But I was doing it for me. Her eyes welled, and for once, I believed the tears were real. "I lost myself. But you never stopped fighting for him. I see that now." She paused. Her hand reached toward the camera, then stopped. "If I don't make it out, tell Jake I loved him. And tell him I'm sorry." The video ended. I sat there in the cold silence, laptop on my knees, wind whispering through the cracked door. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just breathed. Because for the first time, I didn't feel like I was fighting anymore. I took the folder last. Inside was a list of names. Investors, officials, executives, people who'd worked with Richard, funded him, protected him. Some were still out there. Untouched. Hidden. This was her last move. Her real move. A confession. A weapon. A gift. I turned the car south and drove home under a bruised sky. Jake was asleep by the time I got back, curled up in his bed, breathing softly. I sat in the doorway for a while, watching him, remembering all the nights I feared I'd lose him to her lies. But he was still mine. Still safe. The next morning, I met with the federal agent one final time. I handed over the folder, the drive, and a written statement. "You sure about this?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "End it." "Completely." He nodded. And just like that, it was over. Not with a gunshot. Not with a courtroom drama. But with a file and a father who refused to let his son inherit a legacy of shadows. Weeks passed. The headlines faded. The raids resumed. More arrests. More corruption exposed. But none of it reached my doorstep. Not anymore. Jake started laughing again. Sleeping through the night. Drawing dragons and superheroes like he used to. And every day, he asked fewer questions about his mom. One day he would ask again. And when that time came, I'd tell him the truth. Not all at once, and not with bitterness. But honestly. Calmly. With the same clarity I had fought to reclaim. Because the truth matters. Even when it hurts. Especially when it hurts. And as for me, well, I didn't rebuild the company the same way. I stepped back. I handed the reins to people I trusted. I spent my days taking Jake to school, building treehouses in the backyard, and learning how to live again, not just survive. Sometimes, I walk down the hallway and see a photo of us from years ago, me, Emily, and Jake at the lake house, smiling like we believed the future was ours to shape. And for a long time, that image haunted me. But now it reminds me what I fought for. What I saved. Because I didn't win by destroying them. I won by refusing to be destroyed. And that's the story I'll tell my son when he's old enough to ask.